Oh. Yo, what's up? Welcome to Skinny Blacks Lounge. I'm your host and the proprietor of Skinny Blacks Lounge, Rob, aka Skinny Black. We also have in the house my man Taj. Introduce yourself, Taj.
Hey everyone, I'm Taj Eldridge. Ironically, I used to be called Skinny Pimp, but now these days I'm full size pimp. So looking forward to it.
Good looking out, full size pimping house. Okay, cool. And also we have the ghost of Lebo. You know what? Somebody last show, this is for you, Dio. Somebody last show hit me up and said like, "Hey, can we get like a some sort of a photo or image for the ghost of Lebo?" So we got to work on that between now and next show, next recording. We'll get something. I know we got a bunch of stuff in the vault that we can put down on that thing, but we'll make it happen before next time. Shout out to Noemi for that info, for that perspective. So a couple of weeks ago we did something we had never done before on Skinny Blacks Lounge, and we had a show on sports. Like, we had never done a show on sports in the last we've been doing this 3-4 years. We had never done a show on sports, so we did a show on sports. We talk about the GOAT, and everybody's idea and perspective on the GOAT. It's all good. Today we're doing something we've never done on Skinny Blacks Lounge. Also, we're gonna dive into what people may say. The third rails. There's a bunch of third rails of things you don't talk about, things you don't do, things you don't say. Conversations you don't have, but it's important when we talk about where and what is needed, as we talk about defining and redefining Black manhood, as we talk about the challenges of being a Black man in the United States, as we're talking about what does it mean to live with integrity and values, what does it mean to stand on your own square. How can we have these conversations without talk about religion and spirituality? So tonight, first time ever, we're talking about religion and spirituality and the role that it plays in Black manhood. And so tonight, we may have a couple of folks dip in and out. Tonight we have we'll bounce off a couple of perspectives. Taj can tell you about his religious and spiritual walk and perspective. I'll tell you about mine. I don't think people know mine, but we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it tonight. And if a couple more folks dip in and out, we'll talk about that. So right before we hopped on, Taj, you were just beginning to unpack a thought. Share that thought before I hit the first question.
Yeah. I think number one, thank you so much for having this topic. I think a lot of times when we talk about the conversation we have, or the barbershop talk for Black men, these third rails need to be said, and need to be talked about, because a lot of us are having these conversations in silence. But I think for me, and when we talk about the difference between spirituality and religion, I look at spirituality as their personal relationship. And granted, every religion says you have a personal relationship, but I look at spirituality as that personal relationship, that groundation, if you will, that you have with a higher being, whatever that may be, that has no type of guardrail, so to speak, between what that is. And so I think that's it. Where I look at religion is the process. Religion is all the forms and ceremonies and the things that what to do, you've been trained for. And I think, there's a couple of different things. A person can be religious and spiritual. A person can be spiritual and not religious. A person can even be religious but not spiritual, because they're just going through the motions of what they've been told. And so I think those are some of the differences for me. And I think also too, one of the things we were talking about was like adversity. and how adversity kind of comes into play. And I think spirituality, for me, I think has been more of a focus than religion in that spirit, in that adversity and things I've faced in the past and even recently. And so I think that's one of the things, the key differentiators for me. And I think also too, sometimes, brother, I think these are some of the conversations we neglect to have, because some religions, and you should talk about it, you know, they condemn you for questioning. They condemn you for even having some of these conversations where you just have to fall in line, and it becomes more militaristic as opposed to a true relationship with a higher power. So, you know, that was one of the things we were talking about.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. That's a great groundation, as you said. I love that word. I had to write that down. So let's take it even further. So the first question is, what role does religion or spirituality play in Black manhood? I just want to like kind of hone that down and get more specific and with that question.
Yeah, I know, you know, I think the good thing about this, and I hope the listeners, and I hope we can get some folks chiming in, but I think that some things should be said. You know, I think if we'll look at it from a Black man, let's talk about Black men in America, because I think that's something very, very specific. And if we're talking about that, we can talk about some of the major religions that we think about: Christianity, Islam, and the like. And I think that, you know, it's an interesting, you know, phenomenon that we see a lot more Black women in churches today, modern churches, Christian churches, than we do Black men. But we see a lot more Black men on Islam than we see others. But I think that, you know, for us as Black men here, you know, I think religion and spirituality gives us guidance, the way we want to raise a family, the people who we want to interact with, our moral compass, and things that we do. So I definitely think those two things, religion and spirituality, really direct those things for us as Black men. And then if a person would say, well, you know, what's specific about Black men versus white men or any other race? I think for us, because the reality of it is that going back to what I just said, there's a lot of things we deal with that are the seen and unseen, that we have to go through in this country. And I think that sometimes you have to call on the higher power in order to go through those things. And so I think that's how this relates when we talk about us as Black men to this space, and why it's so different from, say, other races of men. And again, that's not saying that no other man has adversity, but I think that a lot of times the things that we face are an anomaly to others. And I think that's the reality.
Yeah, agreed. I love what you said around, as the Masons would say, circumscribe our actions to one another. And also I want to add, when we talk about the importance and the specificity, even saying or acknowledging Black men and religion and spirituality, there's a narrative that we're immoral. There's a narrative that all the negative ills in society, are on our shoulders, and that's a reflection of our immorality. Mm-hmm. When the truth is, it's on us to lift up the other narrative. It's on us to lift up the fact that we do carry deep religious and spiritual practices. We do keep and carry deep religious moral principles. And society, if you look at the numbers, and I love thinking about and bringing in data, this may not be specific, but the last thing I heard was, even doing community violence intervention work, thinking about, out of all of the crimes that's committed, you're talking about 3% of a population, right? That's really doing the type of stuff that are hitting the news. And so there's another 97% of folk not doing that, right? That are not getting the type of eyes and eyeballs and conversations, is saying like, wow, okay, these cats really protect each other, protect our families, protect our women. All of these are narratives that don't get lifted up enough about Black men. And so, we have to talk about the other elephant in the room when it comes to spirituality and religion is the different types of religion, right? And do we get too much into the religious gang banging of, oh, well, I'm this and I can't mess with you because you that, when the bottom line is, if if you're a follower of any religion, like or practice spiritual practice, I'm leaning on your values, I'm leaning on your morals, and I'm leaning on your practices to be the best version of yourself within that religion. And if that's the case, then that's what I'm looking at, and that's what I'm leaning on. I'm not leaning on the label. I'm leaning on the actions of the man and the morals and the principles of the man. What say you?
You know, one thing I would say to your point, and going all the way back to the phrase you mentioned, religious or spiritual gangbanging. I want to shout out the brother of the Nation of Islam, Brother Nuri Muhammad, who talks about that a lot.
Yeah.
And you know, even though I think, you know, you look at it, people who may be Sunni or Shia Muslims, they may look at the Nation of Islam different because they have, you know, it's a little bit different than, I would say, mainstream Islam, even Sufism or anything like that. But I love what he talked about, is that, to your point, you know, we get so caught up on, you know, what, and we're both in the same fraternity. I look at it the same way, where we get so caught up on, I'm a noob, I'm a this, I'm a that, but we all are divine. Now we all are in this same thing with a greater and higher purpose. And I think that's the same thing with religion. Is that religion is the same thing, is that, to your point, we all are striving to be better humans based upon what we feel, what's in our doctrine of study, right? And I think that's key. And I would say this, you know, for the listeners, you know, I am not a theologian, so I'm, you know, I'm just a human. I think I put on a thing, human being, because I think at the end of the day, you know, that's what we all are. You know, we start from that standpoint and show that togetherness. And I think the things, when we think about religion, those things really kind of guide us how to live as human beings. But yeah, you know, I was having this conversation about, you know, just this idea of finding oneself, and how can you find oneself when you grow up. If you grow up and your mother's a certain religion or your parents a certain religion, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be that same religion, unless you know, break that out of that mental slavery that you have, so to speak, for lack of a better word. And you kind of find things that fit into your well-being. And I think that a lot of times, especially us as Black men or others, when we do that, we get often ostracized about that. Whether you grew up as a Muslim, whether you grew up as a Christian, and when you start exploring other things that fit your sense of being a human, you know, I think that's one of the things we fail to really encourage a lot as well.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, just to lay it out. All right, first of all, like, share, subscribe, hop into the conversation when you hop in, comment, all that good stuff. You know, so my background is, I grew up, I was born into a Pentecostal family. You know, Pentecostal, when I say family, I'm like my grandmother and all, you know, her children, my mom and all her siblings. And then you had about 4 or 5, maybe 6 families that made up this one church. And so, you know, it was church on Tuesday night, Thursday night, Saturday morning, twice on Sundays, right? That was my life as a kid. And as a kid, you know, trying to make sense of it, I was just like, you know, I don't get it. I was learning the norms and mores, even, you know, playing some leadership roles, doing Tuesday was youth services, right? Then around, as a young teen, my mom stepped away for her reasons, and she left the door open. She's like, hey, you don't have to go there if you don't want to. I was like, cool, let me go to the Baptist church with my uncle, because they they on Sundays and they done in 2 hours. Right. And then as a teenager, you know, started reading, and then, you know, the autobiography of Malcolm X. And then hip hop was hitting hard. And you think about Rakim, you think about Big Daddy Kane, you think about, you know, Nas, you think about all these cats are 5 percenters, right? You know, knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, right? So, and I'm like, wow, this is elevating my thinking about not just Black folk and our Black struggle, but, you know, this 5% nation, right? This this is all right, right? Let me try that out. And in Alabama, what them cats wasn't around, right? So, and so, you know, just the walk of let me test out Islam, let me test out, you know, these other things, non-denominational. And where I am now is with African traditional religion, so with Ifa. And so when I, you know, started learning and just learning more about Ifa, it was just in alignment for me. And it was everything was just on point for me. Just like all the alignment, physical, spiritual, the knowledge, the lifestyle. I was like, oh, okay. Energetically, that's why I'm and I'll say this and pass the baton to you. The main principle in Ifa is what they call Iwapwele. And Iwapwele is calm character. It's, you know, it's about all your characters, about being omoluabi, which is basically these principles and values to live up to be like the best version of yourself every day. So, you know, that's the way I roll daily. So I'll pass the baton to you, brother.
Yeah, and I think similar, you know, growing up in the South, growing up in Texas, and you know, more so Church of Christ. You know, with my mom and her family, you know, I think I mentioned the last time I was on the show that my dad ended up going into Islam, and I kind of explored that. It's doing the same thing, you know, we're at the same age, and so we see how, you know, hip hop, you know, for its benefit, really allowed us to explore and allowed us to see other things. And you're right, when you hear the word King Asiatic, you know, from Kane, you're like, what does that mean,
Yes.
right? And you hear about, you know, X Clan and Poor Righteous
Yes.
Teachers, which we need a lot more today instead of talking about
For
drink and all
sure.
that stuff.
For
And
sure.
I think that really opened your mind to think about, is it more, right? And I think for me, you know, what spirituality has done for me is taught me that life is more than just getting up and working, making money, and spending money, and you know, and
Mhm.
not having a greater purpose, right? And I
Yep.
think a lot of us in fraternities too, who especially of us a little bit older, that's been a part of it because we realize that service is much more than our letters, and much more than just being and saying that we are.
Yep.
But I do think that, you know, if it was a music, is movies or anything, all these other things, those things influence, you know, how people look at um, religion and their pathways towards it, and spirituality as well. And I think that growth of it. I want to give a shout out to your point about IFA. And you know, you and I have been talking since you've been making a journey and been really interested in it. And you know, I was talking to a young lady. We started this organization called Green Tech Noir, and that was that's getting people to the climate space. So I have a member there, and shout out, her name is Prince Jenkins, and we had a conversation, and she was talking about, you know, I was telling her about like Islam and all this other stuff, especially in North Africa and the Swahili Coast in Kenya as well. And she was saying, well, what came before? And I was like, yeah, you know, that's really interesting because I know there are, you know, you got to think about the history that, you know, a lot. If we start talking about truly us as African Americans, as Black Americans in this country, you know, Christianity was not our major religion. Of course, we know that. And then if we start talking about people in the North, you know, Islam wasn't their major religion because they had traders and all those sort of things. And so it was a lot of religion of natives. And so I think that that's one thing I've always thought about. And there's a huge documentary, and if I think of the name, I'll put it up in the chat or send it to you so you can put it out to the audience. But great documentary on Netflix, or it even explores the role of churches and religious institutions in America for black people, and how we became, you know, so much fervent into it, especially on the Christianity side for it. So if you look at, you know, hip hop as one of the things that really explore the 5%ers and that field of people who believe in that, you have to think about how politics and how really race really influence a lot of the folks being Baptist and being Church of Christ, and how we're so fervent in it. But I think with this subject being back to black men, brother, one of the things I'm interested in, to your point, you know, we both, you know, again, talked about our journey from a religious standpoint and a spirituality standpoint. But I'm interested in hearing from the audience and us is, you know, number one, do you think there are more black women in Christian churches these days? And if that's a yes, then number two is why? Why aren't black men, attending those churches while we're exploring other things, while we are looking at other ways or pathways to spirituality?
Mhm.
And is that something that's going to impact the black family in the future? Because if, again, if the man is truly supposed to lead, and that could be another story, should he also lead in what religion that family looks into? And so I think that's one of the things that's been really interesting for me as I look through this too.
Yeah, that's a great question. To answer that question, I was like, yes, there is more. I would say when I was in the church, there's definitely more women there. I would say, if you ask the reason and rationale why, I would say that if there's a point to where if brothers don't feel comfortable, that's probably on the church, right? That's on the atmosphere that's being laid out there.
Right.
And hold on, before I get too deep in that, I had a conversation on our prayer line, a weekly prayer line that we do on Wednesdays and Saturdays. So this last Wednesday, the subject came up about children, right? And there's a young lady. She's not married yet. She doesn't have any children, and she was like, "Yo, I want children." And I said, "Listen, we have to think about the last couple of generations as Black folk, specifically the last couple of generations of Black folk, and think about what went well, what didn't, what can we build on that went well, and where can we pivot on the things that didn't go well." And one thing that didn't go well for us, in my opinion, is having children out of wedlock. And so when you want to be parents more so than you want to be spouses, then that's the issue. So my thing, and I got on my soapbox on the call. I was just like, listen, how do we get back and say, hey, listen, that didn't work so well for us as a community, as a Black nation, when at the end of the day, the foundation of that is the Black family. And the foundation of that Black family is the Black couple, right? And so, and that Black couple comes before the children, right? It's like that's one of the first. My wife would tell you, one of the first arguments we have is like, hey, don't put these kids before us, because if we do what we supposed to do correctly, they're gone. To build their own families, and it's us. We're the foundation of it, so we are the priority. So, and how do we shift from wanting to be parents to the focus being, how do I be a spouse? How do I be the best spouse? And how do we pour into each other? And the kids are just an outcome of that, just a result of our relationship, a beautiful result of our relationship, but not the primary focus of the relationship.
Yeah, I it's a really great theory. And I think here's the other theory on my end too. And I was trying to find that documentary. It's innate that there are certain traits that we have as men and women, right? For us as men, there's that protectionism that we have.
Mm-hmm.
There's that sense of procreation, because men don't have cycles, so we can create for a while, right?
Right.
Where and I think that for women, there's a sense of wanting to be protected. I think the church has stepped into their role as the protector. And that's maybe why women see that a little bit differently than men. And I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it too is I really kind of struggle with how church is, and I'll get to Islam. So it's not just Christian bashing, but I always struggle with the idea of the business of church. In this country, and I think that's it. I think on Islam, it's interesting too, because I think that in the United States we have more of an emphasis on the knowledge of the Nation of Islam, which I would say for people who are Muslims from the East, they may call them kafar, which mean non-believers, because they believe Wallace Farha, Elijah Muhammad, and the whole like, and we're not there, that whole thing. But I think on the Islamic side, you think about structure, and you think about it, again, if people haven't heard from him, please check out Nuri Muhammad. I'm not a member of Nation of Islam. I find it really interesting that those members there, they can quote the Bible just as much as they can quote the Quran,
Yep.
and one of the things I noticed and we talk about was just discipline as Black men. Again, discipline in the way that they look, discipline in the way they carry themselves, discipline in the way they interact. And again, for me, that's the idea where religion and spirituality come into play, because the religion of the Nation of Islam, I think, talks about that uniformity versus conformity, and how that looks. But also, you have to have that spiritual belief that I believe in this and I'm going to do this to move forward. But yeah, no, I agree with you when you talk about the foundation of the family. And the reason I mentioned that, the first question about religion is, I wonder, does that have something to do with it? You look at, I have a guilty pleasure. My guilty pleasure watching this show called Pop the Balloon. Some of our Gen
Me
Z
too. I'm with you.
I watch it because I fear for my children who are in their age range, they're dating, and I'm just like, it's crazy. But one of the things I've noticed is from an analysis standpoint is, you may have a man or a woman who may come in there and say, I want a mate who's religious, and immediately people like, I'm popping, I'm out, right? And I think about how does it impact our relationships and evolution and growing. Also, there was a young lady on Club Shay Shay recently. I think her name's Cheyenne Bryant, Dr. Cheyenne Bryant, who talked about evolution and talked about how you evolve as you grow, but also when you get with somebody, you both are evolving, and you got to leave something behind. And that evolution may change some things. That evolution may be the same evolution you did from being in the Baptist church at first in Pentecostal Baptist and on to IFA. But when a person is unwilling to do so, because of the throes of their religion, that process, how does it impact the Black family, right? Again, if the man is supposed to lead, and you may have this situation where the church is kind of taking over for the man in the household.
Right. Is the wife or the lady listening to the pastor more so they listen to the husband or the guy?
Yeah. No, I always wondered that, and I think it's just interesting to see on that. And again, no knock on. I think we all have our pathway, but we all have to have the ability to say, does this fit into my moral compass? Does this fit into my belief of what's going to make me a good human being, a good human being to others, and those things too. So I think those are some of the questions that always kind of pop up when we talk about it too.
Yeah. So do you feel that without some sort of spiritual practice or religious foundation or groundation, do you feel like brothers are rudderless?
Yeah, I do. But I want to emphasis on the spirituality. I think, again, going back to, you can be one N, one R, and the like. I think that we see a lot of brothers who don't have the process, who left the process, meaning they've left the church, or they've left the mosque, or they've left some type of organized religion. But I think that, when you don't have that attachment to something greater than yourself, then you think yourself is greater. And when you think yourself is greater, you make decisions that are based just upon you, as opposed to the greater good, whether that be for the community, your family, your children, what have you. And I think that's one of the things that we might struggle with a lot too. But yeah, I do think that, and I think that also relates to dating and marriage, that I do believe in this idea of being equally yoked. I do believe in this idea of meaning of two people have to be on the same spiritual plane, at least at some point, and one could be further than the other, but you have to have some agreement on that before you have children, when you have children, and even after, to stay together too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's been one of the things that's been interesting to see.
Yeah, one thing that in my walk and my journey in Ifa, the Babalawo, that the LA temple, he talks all the time about, you can practice other religions and still practice Ifa at the same time. It's that's a whole nother conversation. But it makes sense because Ifa talks about energy and energy exchange, right? So, and that energy exchange, I'll put a pin in the energy exchange, goes to the negativity narrative around African traditional spiritual religions, Condomblé, Kemetic religion, Vodun, hoodoo, like all of the things that we're talking about, energetic exchange that folks have been practicing for millennia, and have watched patterns, and because of these patterns, and attach things to these patterns, and because of the patterns, and they know that, okay, because of this pattern, this energy exchange can change the pattern, right?
Yeah.
Improve it, good or bad, it can change the pattern. Good or bad is how you look at it, right? It's just like fire. Fire is a tool. It can burn your house down, or it can heat you, right? So that, because of the practice of energy exchange, when we talk about sacrifice, when we talk about the sacrifice of animals and things of that nature, then folks ought to be like, ooh, that's satanic, or that's devil worship, or that's whatever, and all this negativity is like, where did you learn that was devil worship? Who told you that about your ancient traditions that sustained people for millennia? Who told you that was negative? Who told you that was devil worship? Who told you that was something that didn't even exist at the time that these people were in their thinking and framework of their religion? The devil was something else. That's something new. That's a new thing, right? So anyway, I'll pause there and see what you think about that.
That's a whole another conversation that you should have about the misconceptions of the continent.
Yep.
And this whole conversation between, the Tariq Nasheed crowd and others, and Frank. I forgot this other debater guy by the name of Frank, who really controversial on the African side. I kind of call him the Tariq Nasheed of the continent. But yeah, no, I agree, and I think that's one of the things. We cannot have this conversation about religion without having the conversation about race.
Oh, yes.
Right, and especially in America.
Yes.
And so I think that's one of the things we have to kind of think about is the history of how religion was used, the history of how it's still used today.
Yep.
And the dog whistles around it. And I think, to your point, those are the things that impact, the idea of a person may saying that this spiritual connection that is innate in us from a DNA standpoint back to the continent, that we have to sever that, that's severed, because of us coming here and being lost. It's interesting, a controversial word, and it's one of the things I love about your show is it allows us to talk very freely and without listen without judging, as they say, right?
Yes,
and you talk about that break from it. There's a slur that I think is used in West African language called akata, and akata essentially means a stray cat, a cat who doesn't know the way home. And it's kind of similar to another slur in the North African or Arabic. It's called abid. Abid means slave. And so I say those things because those things have been said about us as Black Americans because of a lack of tethering. And I think a lack of tethering hasn't been because of us. It's been because of others didn't want us to have that connection to know who exactly we are, right. and get away from, again, the business of religion and the true spirituality that would tell us that we're greater than what we are. And it keeps coming through it, right? This whole idea about Black excellence and that we espouse here and everything, I think that's key. And one would say, there's this conversation also, this podcast called 154 with the brother Godfrey, and they interview these people all across the diaspora. And it's interesting where one of the things I've been really exploring is the amount of, and again, let's talk about Black men who've been leaving the country and going abroad, living abroad, thriving abroad, versus a number of our brothers from the continent who come here by any means necessary and thrive here or want to thrive here or seem like they're thriving here. And what that has to do with religion and spirituality is that, I think for me, I wonder how that's going to change our look on religion and our look on spirituality here as we have more people mixing from here, have more people going back to the continent. They might get connected to a number of those indigenous religions like we talk about and be more spiritually grounded. And so I think that's one of the things that's really interesting on my end that we might be exploring.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love it. And one of the questions, like, who benefits from good Black men being myopic about one another through religion and spirituality?
Well, we know who benefits. I think that when you do have a one-track mind and you don't think for yourself and you don't have the ability to question, you're easier to control. And that's really the piece of it. I don't think that God was created and created us to be control. I mean, the whole idea of free will is embedded in Christianity and many different other religions that are the big religions. But I think that that's one of the things I always worry about. Again, the organized piece of it, and again, when you one of the things I'm also thinking about too. We talked about the difference between Islam, the Nation of Islam. There's a lot prevalent here, versus Sunni or Shia or Sufi Islam, and then you think about the Western Church versus the Ethiopian Church, right? The Coptic Church, and I have a bunch of Habishas that are friends with me, and I just it boggles my mind that some of the things that Christians here think about or we thought about growing up is way different from Eastern Orthodox religion and Christianity, and so I think that's one of the things too. But again, circling us back to Black men, I think that for us, this should be a sense of discovery for us to kind of figure out what is best for us, what's best for us to lead our family, what's best for us to navigate this world and really be in the space. Because the reality of it is that you started out with the statistics on crime. And one of my things has always been is I care less about what others are doing. I care about what we're doing and how can we control that, even though we might be a small part of the population.
That's right.
And we can take it even from our fraternity standpoint. Even though we're one of 9 in a fraternity, I do care about what brothers in our fraternity are doing, and it impacts us all.
Yep.
Right. And I think it's the same thing too about us looking at young Black men and trying to figure out if there's a way for them to get on some spiritual path. So that way that we can have some type of changing of the guard on something that's happened in certain areas. And I think that's one of the things to be interesting too. But I would say, again, lastly, and I know we're rambling, but
it's all good.
The other thing about it too is that, the media, and I always look about media and religion, how those two things play into hand.
Yes.
And then, if you really go down the rabbit hole around how, the conservative movement co-opted religion,
exactly,
and then force, for lack of a better word, a lot of Black men to go that pathway. That's a really interesting and telling story itself.
Yeah, one thing that I think about when my aunt, I love her so much, man. My mom was just like super close, and after my mom transitioned, she was. Put it like this: when my mom and dad broke up, my mom went back to Alabama. This aunt was the one who used to keep me. I was like 2 or 3 years old, right? And she was just starting to date my uncle at the time, and they thought I was his kid. That's how much I spent with her. That's how much time I spent with her. Matter of fact, my uncle was sick before he transitioned. He was in the hospital with one of his brothers and my cousin. And this nurse came in that knew him and my aunt from back in the day, was like, "Hey, where's your other son?" And then his brother looked at him like, and then my cousin was like, "Bobby," like, oh yeah, he in California. You know what I'm saying? So I say that to think about her, man, and that's one praying woman, bro. This is the woman who calls me, like when I'm going through stuff, like she'll call me. She's like, "What's going on?" And listen, and my point of that is saying, if it works for you, it works.
Yeah.
You know, when you are in it and that's with your connection and you are authentic about it, it works. I don't have no problem with it. I don't have no problem with what you do regardless. You know, I'm again, like I started this conversation, like I'm looking at, you know, what are the moral principles are you pulling from whatever you practicing, and let's connect on that. You know, that's let's build on that. One of my guys, Manny, he always talk about doing kingdom work. You know, like, all right, you know, and it's built straight on morality and principles. So if it works for you, let it work. Question, and I know you got to go, man. I don't want to keep you too. I know it's late where you at. A couple of last little questions. The first one is believing enough?
Oh no. Faith without actions is dead. So I think that goes without saying. And that you know, again, that for me, that goes across religions, whether it's Christianity, Islam, and the like.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. And what does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, it's interesting. You know, I'll put I'll put a personal story into this with you and I and your family and me. You know, I think that um, many viewers may know when I interviewed, when I was, you know, talking with Skinny Black, and you know, back in the day, I think last year, um, I was talking about my pathway to kidney failure and having a transplant, and I noticed that a lot of my Christian friends, they would say they pray for me, and gifts in prayer, and that was good. A lot of my Muslim friends said, I'm going to get tested for you.
Mm,
And even you and your family got tested and
mm,
ultimately gave. And so I think that there's a balance, right? And that's not saying that you shouldn't pray for anyone, but it comes to a point to where you have to do the work too. No longer when you see, you know, you can't just say, yo, my thoughts and prayers when a child is being murdered in this country, sometimes even in a religious institution. There has to be actions behind it to stop that from happening. And I think that is the moral compass that any religion should have, or your spirituality is for you to act upon. And if your beliefs is XYZ, to act upon it. So I definitely think there should be some type of action alongside of that faith or that belief, so that way that belief can be in action. Otherwise, it's just empty words.
yeah, yeah, I love that, man. And you know, as we start to transition this conversation, I just want to say, you know, as I think about the work that you're doing, you know, in the green tech world, Green Tech Noir. Want to shout that out, and you'll get
Absolutely.
a chance to shout out anything you want to shout out, bro. You got that green light. I wonder for you, how can across faith, across practices, how can brothers get with doing something with you that's really impacting our lives on a really global, spiritual, physical, because you know your whole your whole entry to this world of green tech is physical for you, right?
Yeah.
And so how can brothers support you regardless of practice?
Well, you know, I look at it more so not supporting me, but supporting the plan. You know, my dad once said, you know,
Yeah,
you bury the man, you continue to plan. So for
that's right.
me, it's always about long after I'm gone, you know, organizations like Green Tech Noir, which me and four others co-founded around the pandemic, you know, to get more. And the whole idea is getting more people who look like you and I into the green tech space. And I'm proud that
Sweet.
we're at 600 members at this point. And I think that, you know, this year when I turned 50 this year by God's grace. One of the things I said, I'm going to travel, because I wasn't able to for the last couple of years because of my
Yes.
illness. And that travel really opened my eyes, and I loved it because, you know, I turned 50 on the heels of us having a new administration in this country, where their belief, again, a perfect example, they don't believe in climate change, so they had actions with it. So they created
Mhm.
actions around that, whether it was pulling funding, whether it's changing things, even from language. You know, they changed this lab in Colorado. For years it's been called NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, to the National Lab of the Rockies, right? And so I think that that goes back to the things about if you believe in something, you're going to do action with it. And so
Mhm.
I'll say that to your point, to your question about how brothers can be involved. And again, not just for me, but I think pay attention. I think again, if we look at Christianity, if we look at Islam, even we look at, I believe, even others, there's this sense of our responsibility to this planet and to this earth.
Absolutely.
And so I think that when you start talking about the idea of climate tech, green skills, all these other things, environmentalism, it's really spiritual. Because again, we have to be good stewards of the gifts that we have, whether our bodies are temple, but our planet is our temple as well, that we're living upon, and we're getting at. So one of the things I would say is just look around you and see what things you can impact. Small things, right? I think for me, traveling and going back to the continent, going to the Middle East, we just had our conference in Brazil and Belém, on around the climate space. I think for me, what I'm realizing now is awareness is part of it, and then language matters, right? Because I think that people are doing the things around it. When you start thinking about green things, they may think, oh, I'm driving an electric vehicle, or I'm picking up trash, or anything like that. But I think it goes to a lot of different things, and I would say one of the easiest things that I think we can do, and again, speaking to Black men, is think about the things that we own and reduce that. One of the persons that said Americans we have so much clothes that we can literally clothe everybody on this planet 6 times per week just with the clothing that we have. And don't let me get started on shoes and sneakers. But I think that that's one of the things that we have to think about too, is that those resources to make those things that we put on our backs, those things are finite. They're not infinite, and that whether it's humans, whether there's products or what have you. And so I think just the little things that we want to do on it. And, some people look at me and say, you got these, you got these crook diamonds on it, but even these are diamonds that have been come from carbon that's been captured in the air, as opposed to digging into the ground and having people working into mines. The hats that I wear, with the exception of this one, shout out to Born and Rome for this one.
And that was pretty dope, though. I was gonna mention that thing before we got off. That's pretty fly, bro.
Yeah, I'm headed to the continent, so I had to get into my my role on it. But I think that even that, I try to ensure the people, the brands I work with, that I have a personal relationship with, think about sustainable practices when they make their products and stuff like that. So again, I think at the end of the day, when a person asks me what does it mean to be climate friendly or be in a green space, I say very simply means, how do you utilize your finite resources? That is what we have, and that means so many different things. It even means your life as well.
Love it.
So definitely,
I love it. We follow this cat on social media. He calls himself a natural light. And so we always looking at labels, like, if I can understand, is this wheat? Is this, you know what I'm saying? Is it we looking for these the type of ingredients that we recognize, not just be able to pronounce, but we can recognize. We know, oh, okay, I know what that is. That's
absolutely.
So we made that switch, and still making that switch to how we put food and things in our body and on our bodies. And so and I'll end with this. We've been talking about on this channel a Black agenda. And so to your point, it's not about personality, it's not about the person, it's about the plan. And so the plan in our book is a Black agenda. And what are the things, and I want this to be plant this seed in the conversation of, forget a party, forget a person or personality. What's the handful of things that all Black people can get behind and support, and whoever gonna support it, we're gonna roll with them. Whoever gonna support the agenda, the plan, is where we put our time and resources. And so I want to add to that conversation, not just the natural light stuff, but also the environment, because the environment is your example of that. The environment is impacting us in ways that we don't even understand. that we're behind in our knowledge of, and it's killing us every day.
Yeah, no doubt. I love that. I think that's what we need too, right? And I think that, ever since, the good brother Tavis Smiley used to have the contract, I would think, with Black America,
Yep.
it shows that we need something to where,
Absolutely,
we do have this agenda where we come together. And again, I think that everybody has different things, and people may have different things on it. But I definitely think there needs to be some intentionality of how we approach things together as a people, especially in this country. But lastly, I would say to your point about the labeling, and I think that's great. One thing I would love to say is that, well, it's the South, well, a little bit different, because I think, the salt be killing me. But when I go to the continent, man, that's one of the things I do love, is that a lot of the food I eat and a lot of the things we get from the market.
Yep.
Straight from the seed. And it's good. I'm using Mombasa on the coast in Kenya or in Cape Town or Zanzibar. And I think what's been really interesting, man, is just having that diet of sukuma wiki, the greens and the fish. Man, I feel 100 times better.
Yes.
And I think that one of the things, again, going back to the idea of religion, being good stewards to our earth. And there's, in each of the religions, Christianity and Islam, there are tenets around what we put in our bodies and how we eat.
Yep.
And then if you look beyond that, and a lot of indigenous religions from the continent and beyond, there's a lot more around that too. So I think that's one of the conversations that we need to have also.
Yep. Yeah. Even in Ifa, when we talk about sacrifice, guess what happens? That meat is not thrown away. That meat is shared in the community, right? Yeah. And there's a community pantry where folks can come to and get that. So I like that community thing. So thank you, brother, for coming through. Shout out to Green Tech Noir. Shout out to the Gathering Spot. Always gonna give love to the Gathering Spot.
Absolutely.
Gathering Spot at Lay's, where we kick it when we're in town. Be there tomorrow, actually. Shout out to Telly and Twine. I always rock with Telly and Twine. Big up. Hey, this is the Africa one too. So that's, we talk about the continent. That's that thing right there. Ooh, that's my favorite. And just shout out to you. Shout out to you, brother, and the work that you do and how you get down. Shout out to Dio behind the boards. But yeah, man, you got the last word. You want to leave us with how people can get in contact with you, how they can get down with the plan. The floor is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having this platform for people like you and I and others to come and speak and really talk to others as well. Thank you for everybody behind the scenes on it, making this happen. And I would say, for folks who want to get in touch with me, my name on LinkedIn, please connect, put SPL on it so I know you came from there. Social media, Econo Ahmad Economics, so Econo Ahmad is my tag on all platforms. On that end as well, primarily Threads, Spill, the whole nine. But LinkedIn is the best. I would say, from the last thing I would say is just, keep watching shows like this, keep sharing shows like this, come on to these things and have these conversations. The purpose of things like this is for these conversations to not end when the show ends. The purpose of this is the conversation to continue long after the show is off, so that way we can kind of make a change to it. And I think that's one of the things I would say too. And then lastly, shout out to any Black man just trying to make it. I think a lot of times too, we concentrate so much on those who are in a successful standpoint, who have achieved. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we need to hear some of those cats who may have fallen, because I think the key about it is we have to be this community to build folks up. So definitely shout out to everybody who's trying to make it, everybody who's trying to get to that space. Not just physically, spiritually, emotionally, health-wise, and the whole nine. So definitely.
Yes, sir. Thank you, brother.
All right.
Appreciate you. Hey, Diego, take us out, man. Let's hit it. Like, share, subscribe. Hey, get some rest, brother. Appreciate you.
We'll do. All right.